Judge laughs at crying black man in court, but has no idea who's about to walk in. The heavy air inside the courtroom clung like fog, silent but suffocating. Every creak of the wooden benches, every cough from the gallery, only deepened the tension that wrapped itself around Marcus like invisible chains. He stood in his worn, oversized suit, hands trembling, eyes swollen from sleepless nights and uncried tears. The judge, seated high above the room like a detached king, glanced down with impatient disdain. The defense attorney offered no comfort, flipping through paperwork with mechanical detachment. No family sat in the rows behind Marcus, only strangers, their stares indifferent, their silence louder than any words. The prosecutor recited accusations with a chilling calmness, while Marcus's voice cracked, barely audible. Judge laughs at crying black man in court, but has no idea who's about to walk in. The heavy air inside the courtroom clung like fog, silent but suffocating. Every creak of the wooden benches, every cough from the gallery, only deepened the tension that wrapped itself around Marcus like invisible chains. He stood in his worn, oversized suit, hands trembling, eyes swollen from sleepless nights and uncried tears. The judge, seated high above the room like a detached king, glanced down with impatient disdain. The defense attorney offered no comfort, flipping through paperwork with mechanical detachment. No family sat in the rows behind Marcus, only strangers, their stares indifferent, their silence louder than any words. The prosecutor recited accusations with a chilling calmness, while Marcus's voice cracked, barely audible. He'll escape the gravity of judgment. Yet here he was, labeled, mocked, and dismissed. The judge's laugh wasn't just cruel. It was a mirror of a nation's neglect, a chuckle that echoed every time Marcus had been followed in a store, stopped without cause, denied without reason. And as he stood there, tears cutting trails down his face, it wasn't just about this moment. It was about every moment like it before, and the quiet knowing that no matter how hard he tried, he was always one step away from being broken by a system never built to hold him. The laughter still echoed, not the kind shared among friends or born of genuine joy, but sharp, hollow laughter, the kind that strips dignity from the one it targets. It came from the judge's bench, filtered through an air of superiority that made the room itself shrink around Marcus. He stood there, head lowered, the sound slicing into him more deeply than any sentence that might follow. Humiliation wasn't new to him. He'd tasted it in school, when teachers asked if he was lost in honors classes. He'd felt it when clutching a receipt in his hand as he left a store, eyes on the security guard who never looked away. But this moment in court, where his pain was met not with empathy, but with ridicule, was different. It wasn't just the judge. The gallery shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. A few people smirked, some looked away, but not one person stood up for him. His words, his truth, had been turned into a punchline. His explanation, as fragile and raw as it was, had been met not with deliberation, but derision. The prosecutor half smiled. Even Marcus's public defender, overworked and overwhelmed, showed no outrage, only a weary resignation, as if this was expected, as if this was normal. And for Marcus, maybe it was. That was the cruelest part of all. His cheeks burned as if lit from within, not from anger, but shame. His body tried to shrink, as though becoming smaller would make him invisible, as though disappearing might mean escaping the eyes now feasting on his embarrassment. The shackles on his wrists seemed tighter, heavier, not just from metal but from the crushing awareness that he was not being heard, only judged. The courtroom, a place supposedly built for fairness, had become an arena where he stood alone, stripped of power, voice, and worth. He thought of his mother, who had begged him to stay out of trouble, not because he was bad, but because she knew how unforgiving the world could be. He remembered the way she prayed with him the night before his arraignment, hands trembling as they held his. "Just speak your truth," she'd said. He did, and the truth had been laughed at. The humiliation of being mocked by the very person responsible for justice while others sat in complicit silence was a wound deeper than the accusation itself. He had walked into that courtroom hoping to be seen. Instead, he had been exposed. The tears came not as loud sobs, but quietly, like a leak from a dam long cracked. His chest tightened, his throat burned, but still he tried to keep his posture, to appear strong. It didn't matter. His tears betrayed him, and in doing so, gave the judge another reason to smirk. The camera in the corner of the room blinked red, recording it all. A permanent record of the moment Marcus was broken, not by the law, but by those entrusted with wielding it. His voice, when it returned, was choked and brittle. He apologized for things he hadn't done, desperate to end the performance. The shame wasn't just personal, it was ancestral. He carried with him the weight of every black man who had ever been made to perform contrition in the face of injustice. He wiped his face with trembling hands, not to remove the tears, but to remove the evidence of his humanity. Because in this room, that humanity had become a liability. The laughter may have ended, but the echo remained, settling into the hollow part of him that once held hope. The silence that followed was louder than the judge's laughter. It pressed down on Marcus's shoulders as he stood, waiting not just for judgment, but for permission to exist again. But no such permission came. Only more paperwork, more process, more eyes looking through him. The humiliation had not passed. It had become part of him, a scar not on skin but on spirit. Marcus hadn't meant to cry. He'd promised himself he wouldn't. He had stood in front of the mirror that morning, repeating affirmations, willing himself to stay composed. But when the laughter came, something inside cracked. It wasn't just the judge's tone. It was everything behind it. It was every time Marcus had been told to calm down. Every time his pain was dismissed as exaggeration. Every time his words were twisted into something dangerous or foolish. His tears weren't weakness. They were a protest. A last, desperate effort to be seen as someone who mattered. As he cried, the courtroom changed. Not in its decorum or proceedings, but in its energy. Attention grew, not just around Marcus, but inside him. His sobs were soft, restrained, as though he were apologizing for them. And he was. In a world where black men are taught to be stoic, to never show cracks, to hold emotion hostage behind the mask of masculinity, Marcus had broken one of the oldest unspoken rules, and still, he cried. Not for sympathy, but because sometimes pain has nowhere else to go. His tears were for his mother's sacrifices, for the jobs she worked so he could have shoes and books and food. They were for his brother, who didn't make it out of their neighborhood. They were for the child he never got to meet, the one he lost when his relationship fell apart under the pressure of poverty and fear. They were for the moment he realized that no matter how clean his record, how careful his steps, how respectful his tone, this could still happen. He could still be dragged into court, humiliated, broken, and left to cry while the world looked on and did nothing. The judge's voice returned, cold and mechanical now, No laughter this time, just the ticking of bureaucracy, the monotony of a system moving forward. But Marcus wasn't the same. His tears had changed him, not because they made him weaker, but because they revealed what strength really looks like in a place that punishes vulnerability. He stood there, broken and exposed, and still breathing, still standing, still crying yes, but still present, still Marcus. And in the quiet that followed, the weight of his emotion hung in the air, undeniable, unwelcome, and yet utterly human. The courtroom doors creaked open with a deliberate slowness, breaking the tension like a knife through silk. All heads turned, some out of curiosity, others with annoyance at the interruption. Marcus, eyes still wet, barely lifted his gaze. To him, the day had already been written, the page soaked in shame and silence. But when the footsteps echoed through the chamber, measured, firm, resolute, they carried with them a gravity that couldn't be ignored. The judge paused mid-sentence. His gavel stilled, eyebrows furrowed in confusion. Even the bailiff stiffened. Authority recognizes power, and power had just entered the room. A woman stood at the threshold, shoulders square, uniform pressed so sharply it looked carved from stone. Her presence filled the space with something that had been missing all morning: command. She was not just a soldier. She was high-ranking, decorated, and purposeful. Medals gleamed against her chest, not out of vanity, but as testaments to a life lived in service and sacrifice. Her skin, rich and brown, mirrored Marcus's. Her jawline strong, her eyes piercing, yet brimming with something deeper: fury, grief. Her ID without flinching, the name on the card matching the one that had just been mocked minutes earlier. Her voice, when it came, was a low tremor of power restrained. "Your Honor, I'm Colonel Angelo Raines, U.S. Army, 24 years active duty. I am the older sister of the defendant." The courtroom recoiled. Whispers spread like sparks catching dry grass. The man who had just been laughed at for crying now stood tethered to someone who had stood on battlefields, who had saluted flags while burying comrades, who had fought for the very freedoms denied to her own family. The judge leaned back, his expression shifting not to remorse, but to calculation. He had not expected this. Colonel Raines did not plead. She did not demand. She delivered truth-like commands on a battlefield, clear, unwavering, and impossible to dismiss. She spoke not only of Marcus's character, but of the world he had endured, of a childhood shaped by struggle and resilience. She reminded the room that while Marcus had cried in a courtroom, she had seen men cry on the front lines. And never once had she called that weakness. She spoke of the injustice not as theory, but as lived reality. The constant fight to be recognized, the lifelong exhaustion of justifying one's worth. When she looked at Marcus, her expression softened for just a second. Her voice cracked as she recalled raising him, walking him to school through rough streets, wiping his face after bullies tried to break him down. Her words weren't testimony. They were history, spoken aloud so no one could claim ignorance again. Marcus, for the first time that morning, stood taller, not because he had suddenly become someone new, but because someone had finally reminded the room of who he truly was. That Marcus was not a punchline, not a profile, not a case file. He was a son, a brother, a man, and through her, that truth became undeniable. The energy in the courtroom shifted the moment Colonel Raines finished speaking. Where power once sat smugly behind the bench, it now flowed toward the center of the room, surrounding Marcus like a shield. The judge, once aloof and mocking, struggled to maintain control as the weight of truth unraveled his authority. The gallery leaned in, no longer passive. Eyes that once judged now questioned. In that moment, a quiet reversal took place. Not in law, but in presence. Marcus was no longer the object of ridicule. He was the center of reckoning. The laughter had died, and with it, the illusion of superiority. As Marcus stood, no longer slouched, but rooted by the strength of his sister, words, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about one case or one courtroom. It was about reclaiming every part of himself the world had tried to deny. The shame, once etched into his posture, gave way to purpose. His legacy, long written by others in shadows, was now being rewritten in light. Not by the judge, but by truth, blood, and unyielding love. And that, dear listeners, is the heartbeat of a story that refuses to be forgotten. At A1 Storyteller, we don't just tell stories. We breathe life into the unheard. We shine light where shadows once ruled, and we speak the truths that stir the soul. If this journey moved you, made you pause, made you feel, don't let it end here. Tap that like button to honor the strength of every Marcus, every Angela, and every voice rising through silence. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that dignity cannot be broken and justice sometimes walks in when we least expect it. And most of all, subscribe to A1 Storyteller, where every tale dares to touch the heart, challenge the norm, and awaken something real inside you. Your next story is already waiting, and trust us, you won't want to miss what comes next.